everything. I went to our Lord and said to him, "This house is not mine, it is established for you, and since there is no one to conduct the case, do you undertake it." Having spoken these words, I felt as great repose and as free from care as if I had the world to plead for me, and I immediately considered the business as completed. A priest, Gonzalo de Aranda, a great servant of God and friend to every perfection, who had always assisted me, went to court to attend the business, and was exceedingly careful to promote it, and that devout gentleman, Francisco de Salcedo, whom I have already mentioned, labored exceedingly in the matter, and did all he could to favor us, not, however, without suffering many troubles and persecutions. I always esteemed him, and do still esteem him as our Father. But our Lord inspired those who assisted us with such zeal and fervor, that each one took up the business as if it were his own in particular, and his life and honor had been at stake therein. Being, however, no further concerned than because they thought it would tend to the glory of God. Our Lord's help to a certain priest, whom I have already mentioned, Gaspar Daza, one of those who was of great assistance to me in this affair, was evidently seen, for in another great assembly held in the city, he appeared in behalf of the bishop, and stood up alone against everyone, and at last appeased them by proposing certain expedients, which were sufficient to delay the design of dissolving the house and to stop their fury. But nothing could induce them wholly to desist, for they soon returned again, and seemed willing to lose their lives if they could dissolve the monastery. It was this servant of God who gave the nuns the habit and set up the most blessed sacrament, for which he endured very great persecution. This opposition lasted almost half a year, and to relate all the great afflictions I endured during that time would be too tedious. I was astonished to see what mischief the devil was able to do against a few poor women, and how all the people could imagine that 12 women and a prioress could be so injurious to the city, for they were not to exceed that number. I speak to those persons who withstood us, and these women too led very austere lives. But supposing there was some injury or error therein, it would all fall upon themselves, and the city would not suffer any loss. But they fancied so many misfortunes would happen, that they opposed the monastery with a good conscience. At length the people began to yield, and they came to the conclusion, that in case the monastery were endowed, they would admit it, and be content it should go on. I was now so afflicted with seeing the trouble of all those who assisted us, more than I was with my own, that I thought it would not be wrong to receive revenue till the storm was over, and afterwards I might refuse to take any. And sometimes I likewise imagined, like a wicked and imperfect creature, it might perhaps be our Lord's pleasure, since without this revenue we could not carry on, and already I had consented to this agreement. The night before it was to be concluded, the agreement having now commenced, our Lord said to me while I was in prayer, "Daughter, make no such agreement, for if once you begin to admit revenue, the people will not afterwards allow you to refuse it," adding also other things. The same night there also appeared to me the holy man Peter of Alcantara, who died a short time before, and had written to me before his death, hearing of the opposition and persecution we endured. He said he was glad the house was founded in the midst of such great opposition, for it was a sign our Lord would be truly served therein and honored, since the devil labored so much to hinder it. That I should not by any means consent to have it endowed, and 2 or 3 times he inculcated this point in his letter with great earnestness, assuring me that if I continued firm, all would succeed as I desired. I had already seen him twice since his death, and observed the glory he was in, and so I was not at all frightened, but rather rejoiced, for he always appeared like a glorified body, full of glory, and it gave me the greatest delight to behold him. I remember that first time I saw him, he told me, amongst other things, the great bliss he enjoyed, and how happy his penance was which he had performed during life, whereby he had obtained so high a reward. But because I think I have spoken in another chapter on this subject, I will say no more here, except that this time he showed a little severity and told me by no means to have revenue, and he asked me why I did not take his advice. And immediately he vanished, leaving me greatly amazed. The next day I soon acquainted the above mentioned gentleman. he being the individual to whom I had recourse in everything, and who exerted himself in the cause more than any one else, with what had happened, and told him not to consent in any way to admit revenue, but to go on with the suit. He was more firm in the matter than I was, and glad I was. He afterwards told me how unwilling he was to speak on this agreement. Afterwards there rose up another person, an eminent servant of God, and as things were now in a good way, he wished the matter might be referred to the judgment of the learned. And here I found trouble enough, for some of those who assisted and consented thereto were of the same opinion. But this was an artifice of the devil, more deep and subtle than all the rest. Our Lord, however, helped me in everything. For it is impossible for me, writing thus so briefly, fully to relate what was endured during the 2 years from the time the monastery began till all was completed. This last year and the first half year were the most troublesome. The city being now somewhat appeased, Father Benez, the Dominican doctor who had assisted us, though not present, made haste to come to Avila, and our Lord brought him there just at the time he was wanted, and he did us great good, for he told me afterwards he had no reason or occasion to come, but that it was only by chance he heard we wanted him. He remained here as long as was necessary. At his departure, he induced by certain means the Father Provincial to give me leave to remove to this monastery, and to obtain this so soon seemed impossible, and to take some other nuns with me, and also to instruct those who were already there. The day we entered was a day of great consolation to me. When I was praying in the church, before I went into the monastery, being as it were in an ecstasy, I saw Christ our Lord, who I thought received me with great love, and he put a crown upon my head, and thanked me for what I had done for his mother. At another time, when all the nuns were at prayer in the choir, after Compline, I saw our Blessed Lady in very great glory, who seemed to be protecting us all under a very white robe, which she had on. By this I understood what a high degree of glory our Lord had bestowed on the religious of this house. When the divine office began to be recited, the people also began to have a great devotion to this monastery. More nuns were received, and our Lord began to move those who had opposed us the most to favor us exceedingly and to give us alms, so that now they began to like what they had so much disliked before, and by degrees they gave up all contention and acknowledged that they knew this work was favored by God, since, notwithstanding so much opposition, His Majesty was pleased it should prosper. No one now thinks it would have been well not to have founded the monastery, much less to have dissolved it. And thus they are at present so careful to provide us with alms, that without our asking anyone for them, our Lord moves them to send us relief, that so we may live without wanting necessaries, and I hope in our Lord it will always be so, for as the nuns are but few, if they do what they ought, as at present His Majesty gives them the grace to do so, I am sure they will never want anything, nor will there be any necessity for them to be burdensome to anyone, for our Lord will take care of them, as He has hitherto done. It is for me the greatest consolation to see myself placed here among souls, so disengaged from the things of this world. Their whole study is to know how to advance further in the service of God. Solitude is their delight, and the very thought of their seeing anyone, even should it be one of their nearest relations, is a great affliction to them, unless they hope to be able to excite such persons to renewed love for their spouse. Thus no one comes to this house who has not this object in view, for otherwise, neither are they welcome to others, nor others to them. Their language is all about God, and they neither understand anything else, nor are they understood except by those who speak only of Him. We observe the rule of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and this in all its strictness and integrity, as it was confirmed by Pope Innocent IV, in the year 1248, and the 5th of his pontificate. Methinks that all the troubles which have been endured for the monastery have been well bestowed. For though the rule is somewhat rigorous, because flesh meat is never eaten, except in case of necessity, and we fast 8 months in the year, and observe other things, as may be seen in the primitive rule, yet the sisters consider it not to be severe enough, and therefore they observe additional mortifications, which seem to be necessary in order to keep the rules with greater perfection. I hope in our Lord that what has begun will prosper and increase, as His Majesty has promised me. The other house which that pious lady of whom I spoke was instrumental in erecting, was likewise favored by our Lord, and was founded in Alcala, not without